Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's Hinckley Forum. My name is William Betterbite. I'm a student staff here at the Hinckley Institute. The Hinckley Institute of Politics is a nonpartisan institute at the University of Utah. The Hinckley provides an array of transformative experiences for students through internships, forums, and classes. Hinckley forums seek to foster public discourse and civil debate on the most current and pressing issues, bringing in local, national, and international thought leaders. Today's forum is titled Making the Case for Higher Education, 2025 Utah Legislative Preview. We want to thank our campus partners who made this possible. Now, it is my honor to introduce the education leaders we will hear from today. President Taylor Randall is the 17th president of the University of Utah, the state's flagship institution of higher education. He joined the U in 1998 as a professor of accounting and led the nationally ranked David Eccles School of Business for 12 years prior to his appointment as the president in 2021. Next, we have Mitzi M. Montoya, who has served as provost and senior vice president for academic affairs since 2023. Dr. Montoya is a thought leader in higher education. Throughout her career, she has supported student and faculty success, enhanced entrepreneurial and innovation ecosystems, and led collaborative initiatives to find solutions for social, technical, and political challenges. Finally, we have Jeffrey Landward. He was appointed Commissioner of Higher Education in March 2024 after having served as interim commissioner since September 2023. He previously served as Deputy Commissioner, General Counsel, and Secretary to the Utah Board of Higher Education. Today's conversation will be moderated by Jason Perry, Vice President for Government Relations and Director of the Hinckley Institute of Politics at the U. Please join me in welcoming our guests.
So glad to have you here today. Can you hear us okay? I'll make sure all the IT is working right. It's good to have you all with us. Leadership of Higher Ed and Cafe Rio. I'm not sure it gets much better than that. Yes, it is indeed. We're so glad to have all students here, members of our community, and our higher education leadership here with us today as we talk about the legislative session, things that are going to be coming this session, and things that have already been underway. So glad to have you all with us here today. I'm going to ask a few questions of our panelists. We'll go through a couple issues, and then we'll have a chance for some Q&A from all of you. So be thinking about some of those questions that you might have. President Randall, maybe we could just jump in right in with some things we're reading about a lot in the paper. Our legislature, some in leadership in particular, have said that education and higher education in particular is a top priority. It's nice to be someone's top priority.
It's great.
You get to be part of that.
It's an opportunity.
Talk about that for just a moment, because a lot of higher education has been discussed by our legislative leadership, and that is going to lead into what we think we'll start the session with which is a 10% budget cut and a reallocation. Before we get into the reallocation, because I know you've all been thinking about it, let's talk about the steps that have been taken up to this point as we've known about this issue coming.
Yeah, first of all, to be able to have a legislature that is actually interested in higher education has to be seen as an opportunity. And I think if you start to look at the critique and criticism, behind it is actually a genuine concern that this state is actually positioned into the future. And the way I've always characterized our challenge right now is we're going through an immense period of technological and social change. And when that happens, institutions have to analyze themselves and say, are we delivering based on the promise that we've been given? And so I will say, over the last 3 months, what's been enormously productive is at least to have the attention placed on us. And certainly there have been tense discussions between all of us. But I think we're emerging to a spot where we know where we're trying to go, right? And we all actually care deeply about student success. We all care deeply about the economic viability of the state into the future, particularly in the age of AI and genetics and all of the changes that are coming to us. It's hard to argue that we need less education. And in fact, it's more a question of we know we need more, and what is the type of skill and education that our students need.
Commissioner Landward, you've been heavily involved in these discussions up to this point. We'll see a bill soon. Talk about your exchanges with these members of leadership that are following up to the points President Randall just made.
Yeah, I have to completely agree with President Randall. it's a double-edged sword, of course. I think the fact that we're a priority and the subject of so many conversations legislatively suggests the outsized role that higher education plays in the state of Utah. Not only the impact that it has on the state and its prosperity, its well-being, but also the size of the investment that it requires in order to run a system that operates at this kind of level. It's an astounding amount of money that the state invests in higher education. I think in the exchanges that I've had and the work that we've done over the course of, I would say, about a year, is that never once has there been a situation where the suggestion was that the investment isn't worth it. That's never been a conversation that I've had with any legislator. This has simply been about where are we going to get the very best return on the investment that we're making into higher education. And wanting to make that a process to where we can do it in a way that's strategic, that's objective, that's measurable, and that is designed in a way to ensure the kind of results that they're looking for. And I have to appreciate the willingness to have a legislature in an environment, frankly, nationally, that can be antagonistic around higher education, to say, instead of this approach being an us against you, it's been, listen, let's bring the higher education leaders in, and let's bring the legislative leaders in, and let's have a conversation about what we can do that's best for the state of Utah. The fact that we're at the table, that we're having these conversations, that they're interested in our feedback, and that they've been responsive to our feedback suggests that we're still going to make this the best possible outcome.
Dr. Montoya, how have you been handling these discussions internally? Because a lot of it is coming to you as well. I know then our faculty, staff are looking to you as you hear about these points being made and the need we'll have to start talking about the ROI portion of higher education. How are you handling those internally?
That's a great question, and I think that our approach to this has been, as we've heard from legislative leadership, that we've taken that very seriously, and then we've begun a whole process of planning. We have something that we do that's called academic enterprise planning, which we were already doing, but we've added to that process, which the way we've interpreted this request from the legislature and this expectation is that it's a request for accountability and transparency. And so our process has been that we're adding new tools, so we're even more data informed, so that we're providing tools to the leaders of all of our units so that they have the ability to demonstrate that accountability through transparency and planning. So planning all of our resources in a really systematic way. That means our space, our teaching resources, all of our facilities, all the equipment that we need in order to deliver on both our research and education mission. So through a planning process, and we began immediately working on budget cut planning. So whatever is landed on in terms of what we need to be expected to respond to, we began working through exercises. And so all of the leaders in each of the units are working through budget cut scenarios so that we're ready and able to respond immediately when and if that law is passed.
Let's talk about those cuts. So it's a cut and it's a reallocation. So I'm hoping to spend a minute on how you plan on approaching that, because the legislature's talked about their desire to have these investments go to things that have demonstrated student success. They're talking about things that are tied to graduation, workforce needs, return on investment. And the legislature's even pinpointed a couple of target areas like nursing or engineering or nuclear energy, for example. Commissioner, can we start with you? Because that seems to be what's tied together. So how are we going to approach that when that is sort of the lens, and it seems like it may be your responsibility to help work out the framework?
Yeah, thanks. That's been critical, and that is that what we really want to ensure is the framework that we develop is one in which the decision-making is squarely within the leaders who have access to the right information and understanding of their particular campuses, and that's the presidents and their leadership teams in the campus communities. In other words, we've taken the position that we recognize the policy interest from the legislature in wanting to do a cut and a reallocation process, but also recognize that developing the criteria, developing the process, and then the decision-making itself be with the system of higher education and its leaders, those who are running the campuses, those who understand the needs of their particular campuses. So what we've tried to do is identify what we feel like are objective criteria that presidents and their leadership teams can work with in looking at their individual campuses. Criteria like enrollment data, workforce and employment outcomes, wage outcomes, current industry demand, future industry demand, budgetary issues, strategic needs of the state. These are all criteria that we can use to say, when you look at your campus, when you look at your programs, when you look at the outcomes that you're seeing, where are you getting the best returns using these criteria? Having a framework that allows that kind of discretion and flexibility, I think was critical for this to be able to work, rather than the legislature coming in and saying, here's the program that we want funded and here's the one we don't. Having that trust given to higher education was critical in the conversations. The other thing that I think was particularly critical was making sure that we're not just talking about programs. For example, one of the legislative priorities that we've always been talking about has been completion. We want to make sure that as students come to our institutions that they're on a path to leaving with their certificate or a degree. That is absolutely critical. Well, there are a lot of things that universities are doing, like the University of Utah, to help ensure that that's the outcome that we get. And that's not found necessarily in the classroom. These are student support services like academic advising, counseling, and other things. We want to make sure that we have the discretion to say, when we talk about investments that have good outcomes in these areas, can we also talk about the fact that sometimes the investment needs to be in support services, not just the classroom. So that's another thing that we've been working on and advocating for. These conversations are still going. As Jason said, we don't have a bill yet that we're working from, but those are the kind of things that I've wanted to make sure we have.
President, how are you going to approach this? Because the Commissioner has talked about this notion out there that some of these cuts may be based on ideology, for example, a program we care about or a program that has less return, for example. How are you approaching this, your discussions, and how you see yourself going forward?
Yeah, can I just make an editorial comment before I answer your specific question? I'd just like to congratulate the Commissioner. We started this conversation simply around cuts. And he's skillfully helped us all to say, look, this is a reallocation. That in and of itself actually gives us enormous flexibility with what we are able to do. And so can we just give him a round of applause? I appreciate him for that. And so now, to your specific question, we have tried to stand, very firm and clear on principles that each educational institution is different and plays a different role. Our educational institution is a Research One university. It's part of the AAU. We pride ourselves on a broad education that includes humanities and arts. And so as we negotiate and we think about these reallocations, one of the things that we are trying to preserve here is the notion that there's much more that people come to this campus for than simply an immediate job. You're actually coming here for the richness that is the University of Utah campus. I will admit we're still in the process of trying to preserve that, but it is one of the values that we care deeply about. And one of the investments that we made about 2 to 3 years ago was an investment in career development and career services across all majors, not just majors that you'd say go directly to jobs. And one of the interesting things that we found there is that when you make an investment in no matter what major and you get people prepared to go out on the job market and careers, you actually see a lift, right, in starting salaries. And so in some sense what that does is it takes the edge off. So no matter what major you choose, you're going to get a good job because we've actually given you the skill set to acquire that job and know how to work in the workforce. And I think it's investments like that we will continue to make so that the University of Utah continues to be a school that has a reputation of a very broad education that supports students from all walks of life that want to do a variety of things. Personal example, my daughter wanted to go to law school, right? And she spent a lot of time in the English department, right? And that was valuable to her. In my own education, my early days in the English department are what gave me my motivation to write as an academic. It gave me my motivation to think differently about the world. And so you just need to know, I think we're thinking about this university holistically. And we're excited to be able to make investments in programs that not only develop directly applicable job skills, but the soft skills that I think you need to be interesting at dinner parties, but also just curious about life and really good at embracing the diversity that we all look at. And that to me is part of the challenge. And I don't want to come here today and say we've got it solved, but I think it is what we are trying to talk about as we talk through these issues with the legislature.
Mm-hmm. So Dr. Montoya, this approach is going to require maybe some consolidation, some efforts to reorganize a tad, something you've already been working on a bit. Maybe talk about your approach there so that we can still have these items, these programs the President's talking about under the framework that's coming.
Yeah, great question. And one thing I would say is that we sometimes forget in these conversations that our faculty have always been revising and improving and modifying degree programs over time because we have to, because the world around us is changing. And so this has always been part of our process, and it will continue to be the part of our process. Some of the new capabilities that we're adding to facilitate that is we've added some new tools. A particular suite of tools that we've added this year is called GRAY DI, which stands for Decision Intelligence. And the real value of that tool is using a lot of AI algorithms. It's capturing extensive market data. So we understand student demand, which should be part of what we offer at the university. We should care what students want to study. But there's a lot about employer demand and jobs that are available for every imaginable major, as well as competitive intelligence. So what are other universities offering in Utah, in the Western region, in the nation, in the world? So this information helps us understand better how other programs' growth is changing, lets us study that, understand it, listen to employer needs, make sure we're being responsive. As it turns out, we actually have very few low enrollment programs. We have some, and for those that are low enrollment standalone programs, we'll look at them. And this was already happening. We have several really great examples that have recently been written about of programs that the faculty have recently revised. A good example is Peace and Conflict Studies, which had low enrollment, and 2 years ago, the faculty worked on starting to evolve it and revise it and align it with job opportunities. And they've changed the name of the degree. It's now called Diplomacy, and it looks to be a really interesting growth opportunity for students that have interest in international relations and a future law degree. So that's just one example of many where every one of our degrees go through revision. So this will create a structure, I think, as we work with the system to decide what that structure is, to ensure that we're systematically and on a regular, timely basis reviewing all of our programs and making sure that our students have great outcomes, that our employers are satisfied with the students that we're producing, and making sure that we continue to update, revise, add to, and cull or combine, however we need to, degree programs.
Commissioner, when it comes to these programs themselves, there is an evaluation process, it sounds like, that might be coming. Yeah. It sounds like you may be responsible for helping with a good portion of that in conjunction with our legislature. Talk about how you will be sort of helping to set those parameters of what success looks like in these, in our approach, because I think every university will probably have to put together a plan of how we're going to approach these parameters. What does success look like for you and for our students who are watching? How we will approach it collectively as a University of Utah, but also as a system.
Yeah. So the thinking here is to provide institutions with resources and tools to go through this decision-making process in the way that they feel works best for their campus. So it's also, in my view, important that everybody be working from the same data. So, for example, when we talk about workforce demand, industry demand, both current and future, in order to ensure consistency, even though we're looking at workforce demand from a regional standpoint, we want everybody to be working from the same list of industries that we know are going to be growing and we know that are growing now and will be growing even more in the future. And then that way we can ensure that the approach and the way that institutions are coming back with their plans, we can say this was all done with data that was provided by the system that everybody is using and everybody has the same data. I think that's important. I think what good looks like is that we've provided enough tools and enough data that institutions can then go and start developing essentially a plan. It's a reinvestment plan. The idea here is that anyone looking at this plan can understand the rationale behind the decision, and that the rationale is defensible. I'm that good. I just killed the
Brought
power.
down the lights.
Might
Sucking
have leaned
energy
again.
out from the room.
You shut the place
Yeah.
down, for sure.
It was that good.
That was that, yeah.
It was great.
In other words, there's an important component to this whole thing, and that's just simply accountability. The legislature, in the way the discussions have gone, we've been asking them to impart to us a level of trust that allows us to go through this process as institutions and as a system and develop this on our own. I imagine they'll provide us with some general areas that they would like to see reinvestments go to, but coming up with the details is going to be up to the institutions and up to the system. In order to justify that level of trust, we want to be able to show, without much effort, a very clear and articulable rationale for the decision making. And so that means institutions' plans can go in and say, here's where the cut happened and here's why, and here's where the reinvestment is happening and here's why. Here's the justification. It may be one of the criteria. It may be 6 of the criteria or any combination of those. But the point is that if someone looks at that rationale, they can understand why. They may not agree, but it's defensible, both to the public, to the communities, and also to the legislature. And I think as long as we can show that rationale using the tools that we provided, then this process is working.
President, how do you expect that you will be evaluating these programs with the criteria that's given?
It's a little hard to answer the question without knowing the criteria, obviously. So I think most of the discussion right now is building a set of criteria that are reasonable and rational. I'm talking to students in this room, and so one of the criteria that we're pushing hard for is that programs don't go away immediately, right? We do not want you changing your major because a program left. So, one of the things we're certainly looking at is if a program goes away, there's a teach out period. I think we're looking hard at administrative costs. There's been a lot of criticism around administrative costs and different types of administrative costs, and I think becoming more efficient in the way we deliver support to both faculty, staff, and students is really, really important. And those are the other types of things that I think we're going to look hard at as we try to make these reinvestments.
Jason, if you don't mind, could you add one more thing to what the president is saying? There's a component that goes beyond the individual institutions, and that is, and I think even the speaker referenced this in the recent article. There's also a system level approach to some of this strategic decision making. And so as we start to go through this process and plans start to come in, one of the things that we want to ensure is that students around the state have access to programs and programs that they want to get degrees in. The question is, can we use the information in these plans that we're putting together now to start to say, we may not need every program at every institution, but we want these programs and we want them accessible to everybody across the state. So can we start having a more strategic conversation around perhaps institution X, like the University of Utah, can offer this program, and we can find partnerships on other campuses throughout the state so students can access those programs. But we don't need to duplicate the cost and the administrative support necessary to stand up all of these programs all over the state. This gives us sight lines into that kind of decision making too, which ensures that the student experience is still one with lots of opportunities and lots of diverse programs, but one that's done more efficiently and more strategically and thoughtfully. I think that's another kind of outcome that can be a positive development for the system.
Dr. Montoya, you've been so good at the efficiency side of the ledger. Talk about how that plays into this big question that many have in our legislature, particularly in this room when it comes to tuition, because that's something you're ever mindful of.
Yeah, so a couple things there. I'll say a little more about something the president said just a moment ago. When we think about administrative costs, a response to that and a way we can do a good job on keeping our administrative costs down is sharing services. So to give a specific example, we have done a lot of work around trying to make sure that all of our students have access to the same level of high quality advising no matter what their major. And so what we've found is that we've had some colleges had more advisors than others. And so we've started bringing some of those groups of advisors together so that we share advisors, we cross-train them across programs, so every student can be guaranteed access to the same quality and quantity of advising. So shared services is one way that we achieve efficiencies. And I also think that we have on tuition, the University of Utah has worked extremely hard to keep tuition low. And other ways the way that plays into it is we need to keep our costs down as much as possible. So we've also worked extremely hard to make sure that we are working on providing scholarships, whether they are scholarships that we support ourselves or that we raise through philanthropic means, to provide as much support as we can to reduce that actual price that a student's paying, and as much as we can, cut fees where we can. And so we have very systematically looked at fees over time, and I've heard the president talk about how if you look at our actual net price of tuition over time, when you account for inflation, we've actually seen a decrease in tuition over time. So we're very committed to keeping costs down for students, and that does mean, again, there's value in us looking at everything we spend and looking at our administrative costs, looking at making sure that we're performing efficiently so that we can focus our money on support for students and keeping tuition low for students.
President Randall, you want to make a comment about that? Because that's something I hear from you often, is about how you keep that price down.
Yeah, one of the important initiatives that we always have is scholarships and fundraising. And the target every year is in the millions of dollars, right? Our goal is to actually raise more scholarship money every year than tuition goes up. And we continue. Sometimes we hit it, sometimes we don't. We're always disappointed when we don't. And I would say one of the big priorities for me over the next 2 to 3 years is actually to put jaw-dropping amounts of scholarships into the system, so that each student, particularly the citizens of the state of Utah, are able to come in and feel like this is an accessible education. One of the big challenges we have right now is a challenge that society is facing, and that is housing costs and the costs of not just tuition. In fact, if you look at the expense of an education, I would say the housing costs have gone up much faster than actually tuition itself. So you're going to see us launching in the future housing scholarships and trying to take into account the entire bill that a student and a family has to look at as they look at undergraduate education.
Commissioner, just one more thread that both the President and Mitzi talked about too is this shared services model. We've been charged with some of this by statute to look for some of these shared services. Talk about your approach there.
Yeah, it does go back to that question of value, and the thinking behind this is pretty straightforward, and that is we have 16 institutions of higher education in the system of higher education. And they have different missions, they have different roles. The University of Utah is a research university, much different than Davis Technical College, which is a technical college. And so their academic programming, the structure of their faculty, the structure of their organization is going to be different. But there is a thread that is similar through every single one of these institutions, and that is they all have the same kind of administrative services: human resources, finance, buildings, cybersecurity and IT, benefits. And these are all expenses that impact the cost of the educational opportunities that students have when they attend our institutions. What we want to do is see if, because these are things that everybody is paying for and everybody has to establish, and there is probably a minimum threshold of sunk cost that you have to have in order to have a functioning HR office, can we take advantage of the fact that everybody has established these offices, and some are much bigger and much more sophisticated than others. So a very small technical college, for example, will not have the capability or the financing to have a IT system as sophisticated as the University of Utah or Utah State, for example. The same with HR, the same with finance. Can we find ways for us to take advantage of the economies of scale and find savings on those administrative sides? And then focus those institutions on devoting the bulk of their resources and investments into their academic mission and their research mission, and not so much into their administrative costs And so the approach we're looking at is, how do we do this? There are different models, statewide models, regional models. For example, we're testing out some approaches in Weber County and Davis County with Weber State, Davis Technical College, and Ogden-Weber Technical College. And looking at Weber State providing a lot of these resources to those two colleges. They pay for them, but because they're taking advantage of those economies of scale, the cost is much less than having to stand up their own administrative services. If that works, I think the regional model could be a good approach. Cybersecurity, I think, is no secret. This is a significant cost, and it is an ongoing battle because those who want to perpetuate cyber crimes become much more sophisticated, and they're having success. And if you talk to anybody working in cybersecurity, they'll tell you that that battle will never stop and only grows larger and requires more and more resources. We've got to find a way to ensure that we address those vulnerabilities that help protect the data at our institutions, but do so in a way that doesn't overwhelm the costs that are getting passed on to students and the taxpayers.
Yeah. Of course, these advances that are needed largely found inside our institutions. President Randall, you've talked a lot about how economic changes, technological changes are happening so quickly, and universities need to be at the forefront of those. Talk about that for a moment.
This, I think, is the exciting part of education, the exciting part for all of you. Let me just say something personal. In my life, I've always looked for chaos. And I think you like to run to it. Mainly because if you are confident in yourself and you have a new set of skills for a new economy, it allows you to be hugely successful. So think about you all entering a world that will be AI enabled, that pushes personalized medicine, that pushes all these new work techniques. And think for a moment, right, that you will have state-of-the-art training. And imagine the power that you bring into whatever organization or whatever effort or endeavor that you want to do after graduation. It is a remarkable opportunity. I would guess you will look back at this point in time and you will see many of you that will launch your careers with extraordinary success, moving much more rapidly than those that actually graduate in periods of time that are calm. And as part of that, right, as evidence of that, if you look at a set of tech billionaires right now, not that that should be the measure of success in your life, it turns out they were all born and all graduated school within a 5 to 7 year period, when an enormous amount of technological change was going on, right? So what does that suggest? It suggested they left their universities, they left their education with the ability to do things that nobody else in society could. Now, what have I got to do to prepare you for that? I've got to think about how we reinvest and how we make this university the accelerant of your success. And to me, that is an amazingly fun and interesting challenge. And when I like to go talk to all of the people that work here, I say, let's jump on that challenge and let's figure out how we do it to make all of us successful.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Montoya, follow up.
I would say it is a reality that the pace of particular technological change is accelerating. And the reality is that our task is to prepare you for things that we don't even know are yet to come. And to do that, we have to reinvent ourselves. And that is never easy. And we have to do it together. And what is amazing about being at a university like this is that we work with people that will be the architects of future technology and changes that we have no idea how it will impact us. So I think one of the things, if I was to say, the one thing that I hope that we are preparing students to be is master learners. Not that you left with a thing and you're done, but it's not slowing down. And so part of our job as leaders is to both be adaptable ourselves, develop leadership teams that are agile and adaptive, so that you, the students, that's what you see your task as in every single class, is how do I take this material, learn how to learn, because that is what your job will be in the future. And so to me, that's the exciting moment. This stuff is difficult, but that ability to do that and to take what we know and what we are learning and the fundamental theories that are being developed and how do we solve real problems today? And that is exciting to me. And you all, the students in this room, you're the ones that are going to be solving those problems in the future. So To me, moments of change, I agree, they're chaotic, but they're exciting, because if you know how to learn, you can get in that mix and in that mess and help create order out of that chaos and perhaps be the spark of the next source of chaos. So.
It's interesting as you look at this time. Higher education across the country has been taking a little bit of a shot, and you're all talking about some of these advances. But I just maybe this is kind of the question before we have questions from the audience. Sort of the case for higher education. I think Dr. Montoya just made that. Commissioner, you want to do that as well at a time when higher ed seems to be in the spotlight? Why it's important, if it is in your mind, that we continue to invest in it. And in our students in particular.
Yeah, thank you. I think that there's a danger in not thinking about higher education as its own industry, that people are looking to say, okay, you're asking me to pay for something, what am I going to get? And what value do I get from the investment that I'm making? And these tuition checks that you're writing are not small, and we recognize that. And I think that we have a responsibility to be able to not only articulate what that value is going to be, but to ensure that there are every opportunity we have to increase that value, to find ways to ensure that what you're getting in return of coming here and learning, being trained, is valuable for the rest of your life. That's incumbent upon us as an industry, as organizations, as institutions, as a system, to always be able to say to you, this is what you get in return, and it's good. And if it's not good, we have a responsibility to address that. If we can't show the value, then we have a responsibility to say why and what do we change to make sure that happens. Now, I think that for decades, higher education hasn't had the pressure, at least as much pressure, to have that conversation and have to be able to articulate those things. But because of the changing industries, the changing expectations, how rapidly it happens, I think now we have a responsibility to be able to say that. To be able to say, this is what the value is. When you're flat-footed, people start to question whether or not it is valuable, and that's what we've seen. And as poll after poll had come out and saying people are questioning whether or not it's worth going. It's an astonishing data point, but also one that, in my view, represents a failure on our part to not be better advocates for why it is such a life-changing force to go and get a degree or certificate from an institution of higher education, but also to not feed the narrative that some of these degrees don't get you the kind of value that you thought you were going to get when you graduate. Now, there's one more important thing that I think will drive this, and that is we recently talked to employers across the state, thousands of employers, and said, you've got our graduates working for you. What do you think? How are they doing? What do they do well? What could they have done better when they started with you after graduating? They all said the universities and institutions of higher ed are doing a very good job at giving the technical skills that help them work well in our industries. But what we need more of are skills that Dr. Montoya talked about, skills that show that you know how to communicate well, that you know how to work well with people, that you know how to build consensus among teams, that you know how to think critically and problem solve and lead. And these are skills that are the specialty of our institutions. The question is, when you're in those classes that are imparting those skills, do you know that that's what's being imparted to you? And do you know how it will be valuable in the workplace? Are we doing a good job of showing you the connection between what you're being taught and how that's going to be valuable in your life? I think the answer is not good enough, and we can do better. And I think as we start to do that, and as people start to see that, in fact, that value proposition is astronomical, we can reverse the trend of what's happening around the country in conversations around higher education.
Thank you. President Randall, last word on this one.
I've done a lot of thought about why we are where we are. And I often point out in certain speeches that I think there have been 4 disorienting forces that have hit higher education. Let's hope I can remember them. The first is technology. When we handed everyone in our lives smartphones combined with the internet, suddenly the classroom experience changed, right? Because I would stand up and claim something to be truth, and someone would have said, well, I'm looking on this website, I'm not sure that's true. And so it changed the way we started to consume information, and maybe we didn't respond as educational institutions to how that was supposed to move forward. The second is the rising cost, and the perceived rising cost, I think, has alienated many. and it's difficult to deal with. We're fortunate in the state of Utah that we are really low with respect to student debt. In fact, the latest statistics I got on our population is only about 30% of you take out any debt, maybe about 33, depending on the measure and how you measure it. That's really low. So we've got the lowest, in terms of the state, the lowest debt rate. The third is we're in a period of political polarization, and our institutions have to realize that everything we say gets monitored through and filtered through a lens of, did I agree with that before I came in or not? And so one of the great things I've learned about our faculty is they're really good at laying out and leading discussions and teaching people how to think critically and understand other sides. And I think that skill in our faculty, you will see over the next few years, will be amplified and accelerated. And then the final thing is, I think, based on threats to the way we live and the environment and everything else, all of us are operating at a much higher level of anxiety. and those trends are very, very clear in the data. We're all at a very different level. And when you put all of those disorienting forces into a big pot, you get people that are troubled about what's going on in higher education. I will just say that if you look at our best faculty on this campus, they show us a way forward. They show us a way to actually inspire people and give them hope and tools for the future. They show you that their research, right, is applicable, and they collaborate with the community and they collaborate with the real world to actually create solutions to real problems. And then the other notion that I see among those fantastic faculty is they're interested in serving the world and serving the community. And I think that's the simple recipe. It already exists here on campus. We've just got to find a way to amplify it and use those examples that already exist to make this a productive place.
Excellent. We'd love to take a couple questions from the audience. Who's got the microphone?
All right, so
Nick-
there are
Nick
two
does.
microphones running around, me and then Addie over here. If you have a question, raise your hand. We're going to prioritize student questions first. I'm coming right up to the front in the middle to start.
Just make sure you speak in the microphone. We have quite a few people watching online.
That's right. And when the mic gets to you, please state your name if you're a student.
My name's Drew Dennison. I've attended at the University of Utah for a bit. I'm a sophomore and I'm studying chemistry. I guess my question for you guys is, why is the state of Utah not pushed harder for a state lottery? I know last year in February we did, but as we can see from the 45 other states that do have state lotteries, a lot of that does go towards education as well as other beneficial things for our state.
That may be above my pay grade.
Jason question?
I want to take
A
a bet.
state
That might be a
lottery.
Jason
Question
question.
was, why is the state not pushed for a state lottery?
Yeah.
Lottery, I would not have ever guessed that question.
Yeah.
Jason.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
I don't know if you
question.
know this, but they give us 500 questions to review for this. That was not on it. So I'm just going to say that
I
was
mean,
good.
I can
Someone's
speak
getting
to
fired.
what I know. Yeah.
Hey, Chris, take note, man. Lottery, we got to have that on the prep list.
This is such a great question, and it is perplexing because I will tell you, I think if you went and just drove and sat at the border of Idaho or Wyoming and watched how many Utahns are driving across that border to buy a lottery ticket.
I thought it was cheaper gas.
It's fireworks and lottery tickets, I think, is what we're going for. It does beg the question, like, are we missing out on something here? Now, I think there's a couple of things at work. One is a cultural issue. I think it's not surprising that the culture of Utah has long held that any kind of games of chance are frowned upon significantly. And, because that's such a dominant view in the state, that's going to impact the elected officials' views of this. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's been hard to jumpstart. Not that this conversation hasn't cropped up periodically. The other is, I think, some sociological arguments about does it really benefit the citizens of the state when I think some people view that the lottery is disproportionately negatively impacting the poor, who are most likely to benefit from education. And so is there maybe a better way to find ways to invest for that? You have a...
Do you mind if we just take some other questions? That's a good question, and we should have a debate offline on it, but I appreciate it. But just to get a smattering of different ideas out here. Thanks.
We're going to start here, and then Addie's going to choose the next question.
Hi, my name's Addison Graham. I was interested in what you were saying about political, just kind of, just the fact that, for me, for instance, it sometimes feels like the tension between state government and higher education doesn't revolve so much around financial efficiency as much as it is kind of ideologically based. Maybe members of the state legislature think that higher education is too woke, or you'll hear some faculty members here at the University of Utah talk about state legislatures as if they're just kind of right-wingers who hate all diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I guess from my perspective as a student, it sometimes feels like these culture war issues are kind of a distraction from the more important issues that we could deal with in higher education. I just wonder, as an administrator, are there tools that you can use to try and kind of temper the culture war, ideological divisions, and keep the focus on education?
So, still being, I think, a relatively new president, there are two observations I would make that are, actually it's one observation about two types of organizations that I would make. When the legislature, we say it's the legislature, it's hundreds of people that actually think differently. And so when we say uber conservative, there's actually just an amazing difference of opinion in the legislature, right? That's why all bills don't get passed, right? And the legislature lasts 3 months, right? They're different. And when we say the university, oh my gosh, right? That's even more diverse, right? And it has more opinions and different things. And so one of the tools that I think I try to use is to say, let's quit talking in generalities about the legislature and the university. And let's actually start talking about specifics and programs and why the university does what it does in terms of providing a liberal education. And why, for example, you would come to the university and hear things that maybe you think are absurd. It's because they exist, and they're opinions that deserve to be debated. And these ideas belong on this campus, and that's why we do it. Similarly, when we go to the legislature, right, we try to think and say, let's get out of whatever preconceived notion we have and ask a question. What are you actually trying to do? And for us, I would say, Jeff and I, that those questions have led us to interesting compromises and different ways of viewing and tempering what is often just captured in the public opinion that we see right now. So that's the tool I use, right? Is I just say, well, let's sit down and talk. And to be honest, that's part of the challenge of being an administrator is with an ever-changing legislature, because people are coming and going and reelected and not reelected. We have to just have an army of individuals with that conversation, going on to explain what it is that we do at a university and why it's important.
And I would add just a couple things there, some additional tools. In addition to that, the president formed a task force on viewpoint diversity, and that is to help us work to make sure amongst ourselves as faculty and leaders that we are making sure our faculty and staff and leadership is aware of how to make sure we're hearing different viewpoints. And then also we've launched a program in partnership with Constructive Dialogue Institute to create training opportunities for, again, students, staff, and faculty to how do we have constructive dialogue, particularly when we disagree. And we hired a position called Campus Dialogue Manager to help us work with students where we may have student protest and disagreement. How do we facilitate that process so people can do all the things that they want to do and express their proper rights according to all of their freedoms, but do so in a way that's respectful of each other. So I think one is we each have to ask ourselves, how do I have this conversation that might be of disagreement and do so respectfully? But we can also teach these techniques and tools. And so we're trying to do that and increase that even within the curriculum. So it's a great question and we need to do more.
Yeah. I think one more thing to that question that's been, in my view, has helped break down some barriers, and that is, I think that in particular, a conservative state like ours, a lot of this conversation is influenced by national perceptions rather than local perceptions. And so when people see problems being raised in at Harvard, for example, they assume, well, maybe this is happening on our campuses. They're just not the same types of environments or the same types of institutions. But because of that, there's this assumption, and I think it's been built for years, and that is that when someone is going to come to us with a concern about higher education, that the response is going to be one of antagonism or defensiveness. And that assumption has led to an approach that I think has been less than productive. I think that has started to change, because what the legislature now and others are starting to see is that we have leaders in higher education like President Randall and other presidents and those in my office to say, we're going to come and we're actually going to listen and we're going to address the concern. In other words, to approach these problems saying we recognize that we could maybe not be doing things exactly the right way, or that there could be areas that need to be addressed and needs to be fixed, and we will fix those in a way that's rational, in a way that's responsive, but in a way also that doesn't cause additional harm. And once we've started to do that, and they start to see over and over again that we're consistently willing to work on addressing these issues and recognize that we are not perfect as an institution or as an industry or as a system, and that we want to get better and will get better, they start to trust us more, and that has changed the relationship. And I think you'll start to see over the years that things are going to get better, at least locally. I don't know about nationally. We're working on that too, but we're trying to show that we can be a model in how to do higher education better and manage those relationships.
We've got time for one more. Let's make it great. Where's Nick?
Coming to you.
All right. Okay.
Excuse me. I'm Alexander. I'm a writing and rhetoric major. Hopefully you're not planning on cutting it. I'm looking at, or just thinking beyond student programs, looking towards research. Many people argue that Utah institutions should produce research that's relevant to Utahns. What are some ways that the administration and the larger institutions are making this research a return on investment for Utahns?
Yeah.
Who wants to start?
Well, let me just say something quick, because I think that the bulk of this should be left to the research university leaders. But I will say, from a system perspective, I think we've been talking about our research institutions the wrong way. Even when you look at how funding is done at the state level, it doesn't really recognize that there is a difference between a research university and other universities and other colleges, and that a research university mission should be primarily how we're investing in research that's going to benefit not only the state, the country, the world. And that what we've started to advocate for is a recognition that the research university and its mission needs to be funded differently, needs to be recognized differently, needs to be invested in differently to capitalize on the brilliant minds that are doing the research on our campuses. And that this is not only investment that comes from grants, national grants or other grants, but that the state should specifically start investing in research that, like you said, could benefit Utahns, but it's got to be broader than that. And this is a switch that we want to make when we talk about these different missions and roles, is that research universities are different and need to be funded and treated differently.
Let's see, you want to take that?
Well, I would say that, one, how we should do it is that this is what our faculty do. And so one, we need to tell this story. But secondly, I think we have, and I'll just give one example because I see Natalie Gochner in the room. We should make sure that we are convening our researchers to support policymakers on issues that are relevant to Utah. And so the great example right now that I can think of is the Great Salt Lake Strike Team, as it's called, which is researchers from all sorts of disciplines, whether that's from water, air, environment, all aspects of what might affect the Great Salt Lake, from the University of Utah, from Utah State University, from state policy bodies, coming together to really bring together everything we know about research, including ongoing experiments, to see how can we affect change, not to tell the state what to do, but to inform and to provide that information and to answer questions and to listen to questions they have and see how can we actually make a difference for something that affects every single one of us that's living and working here. And that's a great example of what we can bring to bear. And even better is to include students in that process, because our students will be our future researchers and future policymakers and future and current voters. And so this is how we bring research to bear on real things that impact us. Same thing is happening in our health sciences, that as our physician scientists create new therapies, new devices, new ways, new science, and new ways of understanding what's going on and how to heal diseases and ailments that affect all of us, that affects the health of this state, the economy of this state. And that's the value we add. And it's value that is 20 years in the making. Stuff we're working on today, we will not know how it affects us and what it plays out as until 20 years later. But that's the fundamental importance that if you look back 175 years, that's what this institution has done. And I couldn't agree more with the commissioner that it's important that our state invest in that. That's why this state is such a strong economy. We are a major contributor to that as an anchor institution.
President Randall, final comment?
I would simply add that one of the major things that universities do is we develop human beings and we develop human capital. And even if you look at our research labs, whether it's in the basic research labs or the applied research labs or the humanities or disciplines that don't have labs, what we produce because of our research in terms of human capital is very sophisticated. It is unique. Those of you that are graduating, you should feel yourselves unique. You are special in so many ways in your ability to go out and engage in the real world. I did not realize it until my first job. And I was lined up with 20 people that had graduated from 20 universities, and they asked me a question that you're going to laugh at. They said, "Who knows how to use a spreadsheet?" And I raised my hand, and I was only one of 20 because I came from a research university where I had learned the basics of spreadsheets in a lab because they were developing them, right? And that really, to me, is what's important to realize, is that our university creates amazing human beings and amazing human talent. And that, to me, is what we have to convince people of. And actually, it's pretty easy when I look at all of you and what you go out and do in the world. There are millions of examples, not just one or two.
This is going to be a very interesting time over the next weeks and 45 days after this coming Tuesday. Talk about higher education. You've got a great preview here today. It's quite a unique opportunity to hear from the leaders in the state of Utah in higher education. Let's give them a hand. Thanks.